Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is episode 7 in the series, What Makes Marriages Work. While marriage is a partnership, it's a different kind of partnership than any other relationship. This is because the tasks married people share are among the most significant of our lives. How we participate in this partnership matters a lot. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of relationship resources.
I am introducing the idea of marriage as a partnership. But marriage is a different kind of partnership than every other relationship. This is because the tasks married people share are among the most significant of our lives. Viewing marriage as a unique form of partnership enables us to see it as a relationship where both people participate, both people play a major and equal role in creating it, and both people understand that how we participate in it matters a great deal. Just for a moment, think about marriage as a relationship that produces significant outcomes for the people who participate in it. What are these outcomes? The most important outcomes marriage produce are strong and positive emotions. Sometimes people will think the desirable outcomes are a clean home, friendship, lots of sex, and other possibilities. But as it turns out, all of these and all of the other possibilities take place when powerful emotions like love and happiness, gratitude, devotion, sacrifice, and forgiveness are being realized. And we should note that these emotions are controlled by the interaction or communication between the two people. If you want to feel a great deal of love, for instance, then you must find the form of interaction that brings that to pass. If you want to feel passion, happiness, warmth, close to your partner, then we have to find the form of interaction that brings those outcomes. Look for the type of two-person communication, a partnership that brings these emotions into your life. What happens between two people so they can maximize love and happiness and other really positive outcomes? This means that both people are necessary to achieve the greatest possible outcome. Both people need to give to it, care about it, invest, commit, and so on. And the challenge is how you organize your relationship to make that possible for both people. Now, the question is, what can both do to make their marriage filled with the greatest love, the best form of happiness, and other feelings like these? It can be found in the term partnership. Creating the best marriage partnership will allow you to organize the form of interaction with each other that will bring into your lives the most positive feelings and therefore the greatest marital rewards. The idea of marriage as unique partnership is useful because the nature of this relationship is, of course, as I've mentioned, different in some respects from all others. For instance, as soon as a couple marry, they are placed in a situation where by virtue of being married, they will be faced with the need to share at least 8 very significant human endeavors or experiences. And how you share them determines marital success or failure. Because of their importance, these 8 sharing areas are also where many couples find their greatest discord. For instance, you might be able to assess the quality of your own marriage by checking to see where you do or don't argue or have conflict. Do you argue about money, about sex, child care, in-laws, religion, social relationships, how you communicate, and how you get household chores carried out? Do you communicate well about each of these topics so you successfully work out differences and challenges when they come up? If you don't argue or have problems, then the two of you might be fully satisfied, and that may mean that your marriage is getting to be a good partnership. Or it might mean that none of this matters, or that you're simply in a marriage where both try to overlook the obvious need to join yourself to your partner. If you argue or have frustration over 1 or 2 of these 8 areas, then your relationship might still be rewarding to you overall. But if you argue or have conflict over several of these 8 sharing areas, then you probably want to do some work on your partnership. I'm going to describe each of the 8, and I'm going to point out some potential types of differences any couple might have. Then I'm going to propose how to create a great marital partnership. So if you have one, you can make it better. And if you don't yet have a successful partnership, you can create one and have a healthier and happier partnership. Before doing that, I wish to discuss the idea of sharing and the importance it has to the quality of marriage. There is abundant research showing clearly it is essentially the case that the more two people share with each other, the more satisfied they will be with their relationship. Why is this the case? When two people share through several different avenues, such as communicating and participating in the same activities, they learn about each other, which adds to the likelihood they will better understand what each wants. Therefore, there is less likelihood that mistakes and misjudgment will be made. Well, what does sharing mean? In this case, it means that the two of you do things together, ranging from washing the dishes, going for walks, long conversations, watching movies, having sex, engaging in mutually satisfying activities, affection, warmth, humor, and other positive experiences. Sharing does not mean that everything has to be done together. That is not practical, of course. But the purpose of all the sharing is to permit each person to define what his or her role can and should be, and then seek for agreement when the 8 marriage tasks are involved. There is much less satisfaction when how I want to carry out my role is not something that you can agree with, or how you want to carry out yours is not something I agree with. So, for example, both need to find some way to manage money together, care for the children together, find enjoyment in their sexual relationship together, and so on. If you have done any of these with another person, then you might need to learn about how you want to participate and come up with the way you want to act. These actions are called roles, one for each person. These roles need to be clear, and they need to satisfy the person who carries them out and the other person also. For instance, consider an example of child rearing. If one person thinks that spanking a child for misbehaving is not acceptable, and the other spanks the child, then some discussion and changes will need to take place, or there will be frustration and conflict. So consider this question. Which is the most important, that the two of you are united, or you argue for your position until the other person gives in and resigns that something will happen that he or she does not like? The evidence is very clear. When what you are trying to do is positive and useful, then agreeing between the two people is the most essential feature. Couples fail to realize that quite often when they argue over who's right or who's wrong, and then feel victorious because they decided, well, okay, we're going to do what you want, or you're going to do what the other person wants. Sharing, in contrast, means to share your thoughts about the outcomes you hope to achieve in money, sex, childcare, and etc. It is about what you want to do or will do to achieve positive results. It is about the kind of investment each of you will make in the experience and how to make it happy and satisfying. In short, how each person decides to participate and does it when involved in these 8 sharing tasks is often used by people as a measure of how committed to the union each person is. Full and involved participation in sharing indicates a high level of commitment. If you are committed fully, then you can work together to make sharing or participating in these 8 areas agreeable to both, make them function smoothly, and find satisfaction. To help accomplish this, I'd like to suggest that there are a few things that you ought to remember. One of these is that the 8 sharing areas invite couples to form a partnership because they are the things marriage is made up of. Ignoring them may mean that some part of your partnership is inadequately shared, and failure to reach agreement about them may risk either ineffectiveness at doing them or a very powerful struggle to get what you want. Quite often, when something is lagging or less than you would like it to be, the reason for this is that a couple has failed to reach agreement. And so rather than argue about it, they just decide to not address the issue at all. So imagine what happens then when there is an inadequate or unhappy sexual relationship, or there are financial problems because resources are not controlled, or when the association with in-laws is unsatisfactory. Both have failed to reach agreement, and failure to make each area function smoothly produce the twin miseries of frustration and unhappiness. Do not ignore these or fail to deal with them. Learn instead to talk about and create agreement instead. There are two important differences that are general to all of these marriage sharing areas. People likely come from backgrounds that are somewhat different from each other. Therefore, what one person expects or has experienced might be different than the other. In fact, that is more likely the case. Shortly after my wife and I were married, I walked into the kitchen and saw the garbage piled up. So I said to her, why don't you take the garbage out? And her response was, why don't you? Well, her response was reasonable. So was mine. We looked at each other for a minute and just for a second thought, well, maybe we should have a discussion about whose job it is. But then we realized that I came from a family where when the garbage was taken out, it was taken out by the women of my family. And my wife came from a family where her father removed it from the home. Besides that, another difference is that men and women have different ideas about how they are to perform their roles as a spouse. Gender differences are likely and will need to be talked about. One of the most common examples of this is the division of labor regarding getting chores done around the house. 20 or 30 years ago, there was a fairly clear idea. Women did that. Nowadays, that is not the case. Learn that differences do not mean disloyalty and automatically end up in arguments. Differences once solved become the area where growth can happen and you can create the marriage just for the two of you. What this means is that if you can look honestly and patiently with a difference between the two of you and have a good method of resolving it, then you create dynamics in your marriage that the two of you have decided, and that makes your marriage your own and unique just for the two of you. Another thing I would like you to remember is that all 8 sharing areas are very high-stakes issues, meaning there's little in life more important. So when you are dealing with how to care for your children, or your in-laws, or sex, or money, you might expect to have strong feelings yourself, and also expect that your partner will feel strongly as well. Therefore, it might be likely that frustrations can quickly move to anger when things are not going well. So in addition to learning a good method to solve and reach agreement between the two of you, you will likely have very strong feelings to deal with. Be patient with yourself and your partner. Recognize and assume responsibility for your own feelings. And then, if you don't get it right the first time, then say, I'd like to come back in a little while and talk about this again. Ask questions to learn, listen intently, and show your willingness to cooperate. It doesn't take much to say, I'm willing to get in this and try to work something out that will satisfy both of us. That is because you must realize that both people will need to be cared for. Assume that both people desire to make sharing successful and both want things a certain way because that is what they are comfortable with. Please don't accuse your partner of not caring. If both communicate well and use the right tools, agreements can be reached that will create unity and love. Learn to practice communicating so that you are willing to make sure both will be considered rather than just ram something through to get it at the moment. Communicate that every decision will need the participation of both people and both are needed to make that happen. Arguing, browbeating, coercing, manipulating, pestering, offering to pay for something may temporarily work, but if you use any of these, you will discover that each person can withhold what the other wants. As we say in my profession, if you use any of those, arguing, browbeating, coercing, manipulating, pestering, offering to pay for it, then you will learn what fat chance means. I was approached by a former patient in my practice who said to me in his introductory comments, I would like you to help me find a way so that my wife is more sexually responsive. I asked him, well, what have you tried so far? And he said, well, I've asked her to become that. What happens, I asked, and he said, well, for a little while she tries. I can tell that she tries. What else have you tried, I asked. He said, well, I've offered new clothes. If she will do that, then I'll get her new clothes. I've even offered to provide additional money for her if she's willing to be that. So I said to them, do you want to know what that's like? It's like me saying to you, become sexually aroused right now. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And he looked like a little shocked and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, What you're doing is to ask your wife just to fabricate her sexual desire and interest, and when you do that, typically it is not good. So here's what you must do instead. And he said, I'm all ears. And I said, but I'm only willing to tell you if you promise me you'll do everything exactly that I say. Now, the reason I did that was because I didn't want him to use any of his foolish methods as part of what I'm going to propose. So I explained to him a set of enabling conditions for women and men, that they're different for each person, but that he could create them and make it possible if he was willing to be sincere, to be genuine in his effort, and so on. So he asked, okay, now I'm ready. What is it? And I said, first of all, you need to use something called the confusion technique. He looked confused, and so I said, do you want to know what that is? And he said, yes. And I said, it sounds to me like you have brought sex up so often to your wife, she has connected it to many other things in your marriage. And he laughed and he said, you're right. He said, the other night I came home and helped set the table for dinner, and she looked at me and said, oh no, I know what you want. He said, is that it? And I said, that's it. So what you need to do is to look like you're interested in it and then stop. And then a while later, look why you're interested in it and then stop, so that she doesn't know for sure what your process means. Then you need to also create these enabling conditions. What are they? He hurriedly asked. I said, well, a genuine, sustained level of affection and warmth, so that you don't start and stop it. You just are affectionate all of the time with her, so that she believes it's genuine and the warmth is genuine and you really like being with her. 2, a lot of warm conversations where you listen, you ask her to talk about herself, and you tell a little bit about yourself. And 3, kind acts called altruism, where you give and care for her without expecting anything in return. I made him review those before he left. He even made a note or added them on his phone, I don't recall which. And then he left. A few days later, when I finished the end of the day and drove out onto the highway, I turned left and I had an immediately turn lane to go toward my home. I looked over, and parked right next to me on the highway was this man. Our eyes met, and he held up his hand in a circle saying, okay, and it really worked, and both I smiled and he laughed right out loud. My point is that you cannot get a partnership by demanding or coercing or anything else like that. There are forms of interaction that make it possible for both people. Now, where differences exist, both people might be required to make changes and learn to do something differently. Almost always, solving problems with these 8 areas and reaching agreement will require that both people adapt to something new they have not previously done. And adapting means to try something out, experiment to test and see how it works. It might take more than one conversation or even a test to get your agreement the way you want it. When my wife and I were first married, we both agreed that I would pay the bills and that we would have an account and both of us could write on it. But that was a little problematic because sometimes she didn't record the amounts on the checks that she wrote, and so I didn't know what was in the account, and sometimes she felt like she had to ask me for permission to spend money. So we had a conversation. I found out what was important to her and so on, and what was important to me, and our solution was simple. We opened another account. Both of us wrote on it, but she managed that. And we put into her account the amount of money that she would take care of and the bills she'd pay, and I did the same, and so both of us worked it out. We were adaptable on that occasion. Check and see how adaptable you are willing to be. Now, here's what you need to do. Sort out the issues to identify whether a difference is based on personal preference, I repeat, personal preference, or a principle. Personal preferences can more easily be adapted because they're just simply preferences you have at the time, and there might be something better that you could do. Principles, however, are like values, and they are much harder to adapt or change, and may just need to be respected because they are part of values and character. For example, religious beliefs and values and character traits are like these. Please remember also that what it would be like to agree and feel comfortable in all 8 sharing areas. Where money is talked about, the two of you manage the conversation well, and your resources are controlled and organized to provide for your family. When sex is being talked about and participated in by both people, it is a source of fulfillment for both. When we visit in-laws, we both know what to expect and have good experiences rather than frustrations. When a child-rearing issue arises, we both get together and work out as a team to promote the growth, happiness, and well-being of our kids. I know a couple, for example, who, when one parent is dealing with a child and the other parent doesn't understand or disagree, they table the conversation with the child, go into a private room and talk over what their strategy is, and then come out and both of them deal with the child. Let's also imagine that communication is satisfying and serves its purpose. Household work gets done cooperatively and efficiently as the two of you like it, and your social life is pretty much as big or small as both would like it. When you communicate, it is pleasant, constructive, and satisfying. Do you think this is unrealistic? Not if you create a very good partnership. So let's examine each of the 8 sharing areas and identify the possible differences you might find between you and your partner. And also, please consider that some people have tried that didn't work or won't work. I'm going to repeat that. I am going to describe some things people have tried to reach agreement that didn't work so that you know what not to do. So first of all, I'm going to present information about money and financial resources. We're all familiar with money, and most of us like it. And when we enter marriage, we have our own ideas about what to do with it. Some of those ideas we get from our parents, and some we develop on our own. Unless you are very wealthy, money is an inexhaustible resource, which means it must be regulated, organized with priorities in mind, and conserved. If not, then couples find themselves in serious financial trouble, which adds stress and unhappiness. Sometimes these money problems add so much pressure, and the failure to reach agreement about it can lead to divorce. Here's why. Individuals come into marriage with different purposes in mind. Some may want to use money to acquire possessions. That is, they value possessions like a good piece of furniture. Others may prefer to create experiences instead, like traveling to a new location and having an experience that is enjoyable. Others may use money for emotional purposes, such as making themselves feel better when they spend, or spend money in order to punish someone whom they believe has made them unhappy. Some want to be detailed bookkeepers and watch every cent, and others do not wish to be regulated or so specific. Most do not wish to be controlled by someone else and may not even want to regulate themselves. So unless both people come with very similar attitudes and goals in mind, these differences will need to be discussed and agreements reached. Here is what does not seem to work well. One person controlling the finances and making all of the decisions. Another thing that does not work well is to hide their spendings or their savings from one another. Compulsive spending because of a weak moment and a sale is on is also something that doesn't work. Blaming the other person for financial problems reduces the desire to cooperate. And then when either party spends more than the income available doesn't work. Getting into credit card debt doesn't. Failure to budget doesn't. And failure to communicate well doesn't. These are all things not to do. And I propose that you review these so that you make sure that you don't follow the pattern of people who have tried them and then failed. Let's go on to the idea of creating a partnership so that you can have a healthy sexual relationship. Of all the sharing areas in marriage, sex is probably the most well-known, and for obvious reasons, it is often thought about and is considered as crucial to the quality of the relationship. Actually, in research about the role of sex in a marriage, it is less important than most people think. Many couples have exceptionally good relationships but do not have a happy sexual relationship themselves. The idea is, however, that sex can do a lot of things for a couple, so we want to use it to bless and enhance the quality of marriage. So there are several reasons why this is the case. Here are some of the potential differences. People often come into marriage with unusual expectations for what sex is going to be like. Some get these extreme expectations from watching pornography. Some do not think it very significant, and some think it is highly important. Some of those who think it important may place too much emphasis on it and interpret the quality of their entire relationship in terms of the quality of their sexual experience. The point is, of course, that individuals will differ in terms of the desired frequency and the practices, so they might have differences about both. Will be gender differences, which may be linked to the idea that men do not know much about women, and women do not understand much about men. Most men who do not understand women typically do not appreciate that women can be much more sexual than men if approached the right way. Many women assume that sex is all men want in the relationship. It is also surprising that many people are not adequately informed about human sexuality, and so may lack knowledge and have some apprehensions about it. In the day of widely available sexual literature and video presentations about it, a majority of parents still do not teach their own children about sex and what a healthy sexual relationship is. Instead, they continue to rely on some fairly boring and sterile school slideshow to educate. As a result, some individuals are less than fully aware of the emotional aspects of sexuality, giving way too much focus to the physical and the mechanical parts of sex. And as a result of all the foregoing possibilities, many couples may have difficulty talking openly about sex, either regarding what problems and difficulties there might be or what each may desire. This makes reaching agreement even more difficult. Well, many people have tried many strategies to reach agreement, and the following didn't work and hasn't worked for any couple. So, in an effort to make attempts to either create a good experience or solve problems, don't try any of that I'm going to describe. Don't, for example, assume primary responsibility for making sex exciting and positive. Some women, for example, assume that it is her responsibility to serve the needs of her husband without regard for her own experience. That does not work. Some people have demanded that one person become more responsive. That doesn't work. Some have bribed the other, giving gifts to prime the other's interest. Some have increased affection as a sign of interest, and then when sex happens, the rate of affection decreases. In some cases, the husband's affection, which he thinks is going to stimulate his wife's interest, stops during the wife's menstrual period because he thinks sex isn't going to happen. As a very smart person, the wife catches on quite quickly and understands that his affection may be more manipulative than sincere. That is not a good thing. Other couples have attempted to increase sexual interest by mutually watching or reading pornography, getting a spouse intoxicated, exerting pressure for one to participate, withdrawing, and not talking about sex because of hurt feelings, withholding sex as leverage for some argument. None of these, I repeat, work to reach agreement and help a couple find a satisfactory sexual experience. You can see there are many things which have been tried, but learning how to resolve differences and with tenderness and compassion, learning to talk things over will be a good beginning. There's an old axiom in regard to the development of positive sexual relationships. The best sexual organ you possess is your brain. And it is in your brain that you need to learn to understand about men and women and about your own sexual desires and your own sexual experiences. Now let's move on to rearing children. Childcare, of course, is another marital task that brings with it very intense feelings. It can become a form of cooperation and union that creates positive conditions for the child and the parents, or if and when parents fail to agree, it can create raging conflict, making attempts to solve it seem unlikely. And in this case, it creates real dilemmas for the children. The absence of parental agreement regarding child rearing can be linked to a variety of childhood problems. I'm going to repeat that. The absence of parental agreement regarding child rearing practices can be linked to a variety of childhood problems for your children. Well, what are the potential disagreements? Two individuals may come from very different backgrounds, that's obvious, and find it challenging to agree on how strict to be, how lenient to be, what to do when children disobey, whether to yell at children or not, who carries out specific duties like preparing meals for children, getting homework done, or getting them to bed. Parents may disagree on whether to punish or what kind of punishment if a child makes a mistake. They may disagree on how many rules to set up or how to enforce them. Two people may disagree on how children are to learn new lessons, how to dress, what are acceptable gender roles, how much work versus how much play, how much to allow children access to computers and other electronic devices, when to get them smartphones, and how much to regulate them versus how much freedom to allow. Disagreements may also exist regarding how to communicate with children, including what to say or not to say about certain topics like sex. Parents may differ in deciding how many activities like sports, drama, music lessons, and etc. children should be allowed or encouraged to participate in. Among the more significant disagreements is whether both parents are loyal to each other and supportive to each other when there are real childhood issues and concerns about matters that are going to impact the child for a long time. When both disagree and use the disagreement to disqualify the other's attempts, the dilemma for children can be significant and enormous. Many people have tried methods of child caring that look like they might work, but often bring unintended consequences that are not good for the child. So here are some examples of what people have tried to reach agreement that didn't work well. So, if parents argue much, one parent might, out of exasperation, say, "Okay, you do it the way you want to," and then withdraw to the periphery of the family. That's not good. Children benefit from the involvement of both parents. When parents lack agreement, both may be involved but countermand the efforts of the other. A more lenient parent might allow a child to violate a rule that the other parent set, for example, and thus communicate to the child that a rule is not a rule. Another thing parents try when they do not share well is for one to draw their children close to him or her as if they are competing for the love and warmth of their children. They create alliances with some children and not with others, and in doing so make their children emotionally dependent and may motivate some children to withdraw from the other parent. These children also may have difficulty living a separate, dependent life as they mature. If there is sufficient conflict between the parents over child care, one or both parents may communicate about their marital problems with the child. They make this child the family problem solver, which gives the child an undue burden of responsibility and may interfere with his or her abilities to live his or her own life. When parents do not agree and do not support one another, then each parent will have emotional needs that are not met by their partner and may turn to one or more of their children to satisfy them. Sometimes in these cases, the children actually trade places with their parents and parent their parents. Next, let's move to in-laws. There are many well-known jokes about in-laws, especially about mothers-in-law. Some of these might be true, but the real reason mothers-in-law are picked out is because some mothers have a very hard time adapting themselves to their children's new relationship, which require allowing any new couple the freedom and space to live as they wish and separate from their mothers. As it turns out, some of the responsibility for that should also lie with the children, who have their own feelings regarding separating from parents. Yet in-laws, please remember, are the children's grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. This extended family offers a great number of advantages to any couple and their children if agreement can be reached. I once heard someone say that the reason why grandparents get along so well with their grandchildren is that both have a common enemy. What do couples need to do to reach agreement, or what do they need to reach agreement about? Usually it has to do with how much time is spent with one family as compared to another. Some people differ in terms of whether to accept in-laws' offer to help them. Also, sometimes differences exist about which holidays or events to participate in as compared to other families. Other differences have to do with what the in-laws are told and what is kept private, how much influence in-laws attempt to exert as compared to a couple living their own lives. A young couple approached me on one occasion and told about her parents who came to visit periodically, and while they were there, they attempted to get the couple to clean their apartment, or they themselves cleaned it. They reviewed the couple's financial situation, occasionally questioned their diets to see if they were okay, and generally exerted quite a bit of parental control. Now, you might think, or the parents thought, that they were simply carrying out the parental tradition, but in truth, they were intruding on this young couple. I proposed to them that the next time these parents came, that after they got situated, announce to them that the two of you are going to play golf, and then indicate to them that if the parents wanted to, they could They could clean the apartment while the couple were gone, and that would be of real help to them. So the young couple left. Well, for a while, these parents didn't visit, but when they did, they stopped emphasizing what the young couple could do and stopped intruding on them. On another occasion, a young married woman told about how her mother would call once or twice a day and want to chat and talk and so on. And this daughter didn't want to appear to be impolite, and so she wanted to know what she could do. And I suggested that what she does is when her mother calls, end the conversation by asking her mother to do something for her, like, could you bring me some potatoes when you come to visit? She did that a few times, and then the mother called less often. Now, differences can become more complex with in-laws if a married couple join in a family business or other type of association where dependence on money is involved. I've spent quite a bit of my professional life mediating or dealing with family businesses where fathers and mothers, children, and in-laws had difficulty because of business decisions. Well, here's what has been tried and didn't work well. One spouse demanding no contact between his partner and his or her parents. Both agreeing to have so little contact with either side their children didn't know their grandparents. Another thing that doesn't work well is to attempt to overregulate the nature of the in-law relationship. Some husbands will tell his wife, this is what you can do and can't do, or vice versa. Confronting in-laws with bad behavior doesn't work well. Hoping that they'll withdraw just hurts feelings and confuses them. Some individuals perpetuate conflict between themselves and their in-laws for years and carry that out as a bad example to their children. I fail to understand when parents have real difficulty with their in-laws, and then unless the in-laws are bad people, why you would do that for years and years and years and communicate to your children that that's a good strategy. After all, they're going to marry somebody, and these people who do that are going to have in-laws. Quite often, some parents will tell their children about mistakes made by their grandparents and other relatives. And another difference which can happen is when both spend so much time with in-laws that one's own family suffers. Reaching agreement between any couple themselves is an essential part of establishing a positive relationship with in-laws. When we marry an individual, we also marry that person's family in a way. And it can be a difficult thing unless it is made easy by the kindness and love of both parties. Then, hopefully, everyone can create a positive experience. Now let's review a couple's social life. In our current era, there are numerous opportunities for a variety of social experiences for each couple. Each person may have friendships they want to maintain. They may want to get out on dates with people in the evenings. They may want even to share vacations with friends. Good friends are one of the blessings of life, and they can provide support, a listening ear, and sharing important life events. They may also provide opportunities for work, to meet other people, and for recreation. That is, if agreement can be reached by a couple so that friends and social life are acceptable to both. Well, what are the differences that may need to be resolved? The most obvious, of course, is the amount of time spent with friends or friends that take time away from the couple. Sometimes friends of an opposite gender may seem more sympathetic and lead one spouse to spend more time talking with that individual during an evening out. This may lead to other things, as many couples have found out. Another difference is what any individual tells friends that may be considered private by a spouse. Another common difference that needs to be solved appears when one member of a marriage is a bit disloyal and says critical things to friends about their spouse. Still another may be a sense of competitiveness with friends concerning new possessions, social prominence, children's success, and wealth. The motive to compete may drive the decisions of a couple. I know of couples who move into a neighborhood, see the size of house and the toys, and believe that they have to get themselves into the same situation. Well, what doesn't work? Well, ignoring friendships as a problem and not taking it through and working to make sure that we have agreement is one of the problems. Avoiding all friends doesn't work. Borrowing money from relatives to support the social life they both want but not afford. Becoming enamored with friends of the opposite gender. Using other people and what they do as evidence to support the position one takes in an argument in their own marriage. Comparing one's spouse unfavorably with the spouse of a friend. All these problems require agreement, and if this couple wish to have a positive partnership, you will solve it and spread warmth and tenderness across the marriage. How about religion and values? It's not uncommon for people to marry individuals of different religious backgrounds and to have their own ideas about what is right or wrong. If neither person is very involved in their religion, there's usually less difficulty. That is until children come along and one or both wish their children to be reared in a certain tradition. Sometimes couple will agree on values but disagree about organized religion and the benefits of it. Well, what doesn't work well when couples are trying to reach agreement about religion and values? Each person's faith will be shown by a certain time commitment, which time is not available to the other person. Being insensitive to this doesn't work. Sometimes the religious person desires to share experiences that a partner does not want to listen to. One feels rejected and the other feels put upon. Another type of solution that doesn't work is disrespect for the other person's viewpoint, manifest in ridicule and mockery. Another method that doesn't work is one where the religious person preaches excessively to the other person who's the non-religious person. This may lead to withdrawal of affection, even withdrawal from sex, when disagreements are brought to light and agreement is not created. Finally, sometimes the person who is more religious will attempt to convert the less religious person by using some strategy such as unexpectedly bringing church officials to the home. Mutual respect and agreement would be a lot better. How about communication? If you fully understood the importance of reaching agreement regarding important tasks and sharing ideas of marriage, one would think you would also understand the importance of accurate communication. Working very hard and constructively to set up a good communication plan probably should be one of the first joint agreements couples should establish. Couples may differ on how they wish to talk. They may differ in terms of one being more expressive and open and aware of feelings, etc., while the other is more closed and less able to express himself. Sometimes there are gender issues here, and one or the other may attempt to impeach the other for saying too much, too often, or saying too little, or not often enough. People often disagree on which words are out of bounds and which are okay. Many people disagree on the impact of words. Some think the impact to be significant, and others think words are just words, and negative words should be excused as occurring in the heat of the moment, and not really interpreted to be as a problem. Some people will ask for joint participation in talking through their challenges, and others will opt out, suggesting why he or she, because it just leads to a bad outcome. Communication in marriage is like a universal tool, used in virtually every other sharing area in marriage. When people do not do it well, there may be difficulties in other areas. It's worth working on. Now let's take a look at household work. It has not been very long since there was in American society a clear distinction between men's and women's work. This division was socially accepted mostly in the mid-20th century and assumed by most people up through and even after World War II. During the war, however, men fought and women went into the workforce to help the war effort. That, of course, is not true for every man or woman. But many women liked working as an additional dimension to their lives. And after the war, the so-called feminist movement brought attention to the gender differences, and many other men and women were brought into contact with this difference. The consequences of these two social movements, however, did not bode well for many marriages. Even though women may have entered the workforce and husbands appreciated the extra income, women were, at the beginning, still typically tagged with the responsibility of taking care of household work. Thus, a new problem was born. Many men came home from their work hoping to rest, and their wives were still expected to come home, but continue on with household duties. This became a major source of conflict in American marriages, and for years this one disagreement showed up as being very popular. In the last 2 decades, though, there is research showing that movement has been made, and even though a woman may not work outside the house, more couples are sharing and getting household work done. Well, what have people tried that doesn't work? Well, they have to decide what to do about available time to wash, learn, do yard work, and so on. If both work outside the home, there are times when both are feeling the pressure and hope the other will take care of things. There are a lot of intense looks of disbelief when they find out that each has similar pressures. Couples differ in terms of what decisions are made about landscape, home design, and maintenance. So what do we do? Well, when we try to help solve these, the answers will virtually always be the same. We need a strategy that makes the partnership real and typically equal, that is, equal in terms of not where both individuals are the same, but equal in terms of value and equal in terms of investment and commitment. So what kinds of things could we do as a strategy to forge agreements and establish a strong and positive relationship? Here's what I propose and that I have found useful with large numbers of couples. First of all, start the process by doing things together to create the pattern of sharing with each other so that you feel trust that sharing is a legitimate thing. The purpose, of course, is to unify, not to win. The purpose is to unify so that you cannot care much about who's right or who's wrong. Second, agree to identify and stay on one issue at a time and do not enlarge it to other issues. Also identify the words used in each sharing areas and tell each what the definitions of are. What words are appropriate to sexual communication, to money management, to in-laws and so on, and define them. Make a list of them and define them so that you communicate early what they mean to you and what they mean to your partner. This is to avoid pitfalls of semantics, where sometimes people will argue over something and realize that it's just simply the definition of the term. Defining things first sets the stage for both people to understand the possibility of miscommunication and avoid it. Next, both need to communicate a desire to reach agreement as a way of forming a good partnership between them. That may seem so self-evident to you that it doesn't need to be mentioned, but I would point out to you that when people have intense feelings, one of their first inclinations is to assume that they're going to have to compete for a good solution. So when you sit down and have a discussion to reach agreement, emphasize that your purpose is to reach an agreement as a way of forming a good partnership between the two of you. Please also understand that it is important to communicate the axiom that any agreement or solution will consider both people, trying to satisfy both if that's possible, and no one is going to make big decisions that leave the other out. Now, in order to make that possible, learn to pay attention to something I call the two want-tos. It is just simply asking, what do you want here, and telling what you want. A lady in my office one day asked if she could ask me some personal questions, and I said, sure. And she wanted to know how I managed money in my family. I answered this way, it is just the way I want it. She said, oh, really? And I said, yes. And then she said, well, can I ask about your sexual relationship? And I said, well, that's the way I want it as well. She said, well, what about your wife? And I said, I think you've reached a false conclusion. If you were to ask my wife those same questions, she would say, it's just how I want it. This was an unfamiliar territory to this woman, who thought that there had to be evidence, argumentation, or to establish something that she thought was appropriate. So we learn to view differences as opportunities to grow and to communicate love in, not to see who is right or who will win. Besides that, every couple, if you paid attention to the differences and weren't frightened by them, you could get to work to create what is called the third alternative. The third alternative is something that's better than what either of you brought up in the first place. You can also learn how to carry out some communication strategies that will help you reach agreement. One of these is called negotiating. Negotiating is the process that you communicate with your partner to learn how to carry out your role as a partner and making deals with them, not exactly like a business deal, but it sounds like this. Okay, in this situation, if I do this, would that be okay with you? And if I did that, would that be okay with you? And then if I did that, would that be okay with you? And then if each person goes through that process, you can negotiate your roles. There are sometimes necessary to talk for a greater length when there are differences of opinion, but I promise learning to communicate that you care deeply about what the other person thinks or wants rather than argues smooths the way for an agreement to be reached. We also need a problem-solving strategy that get to a solution. Quite often when there's a lot of argumentation, we argue to a standstill, stop it, go around with stiff and hurt feelings for a few days, then return as if life, can begin the same way, and it will, and the same conflict will result in just a little while. We need a problem-solving strategy that is a list of steps that get to a solution. I repeat, a solution where both are satisfied and neither are left behind or overrun. It's easy. Identify the problem and agree on what it is that you're going to talk about. Then identify potential alternatives. Could we try this? Could we try that? And you get a list of alternatives. Then you test to see which one is the most important to your partner and which is most important to you. Then you run a test and see. Quite often, when you do this a few times, we learn what each other wants, and so we don't have to go through the formality of steps. But you can do it easily if there's genuine trust in the process that we're going to talk, avoid arguing, and we're going to talk in the hopes of reaching a solution to the problem. Sometimes problem-solving methods are called decision-making, and making decisions and actually carrying them out turns out to be really important. Here's what I would suggest regarding to decisions. Select what you're going to make a decision about, then identify the alternatives like you do in problem solving, select an alternative, and then reinforce what the decision is, and then set up a follow-up period to make sure that we're carrying out the decision. Many couples who argue over something and don't reach agreement also do not follow through on the decisions they make. It's also useful to use a meeting once a week to plan and set goals about what you want to accomplish and take a look at the desirable outcomes. I know that some couples who have finally learned that when they set goals, some of the goals are the feelings that they want to feel after doing something. So if you want to go on a vacation, what feelings do you want? If you want to go on a walk, what feelings do you want? And they tell each other this, and gradually over time they learn how to help each other. They help each other actually find those feelings. It is also useful to express a high degree of support and affection, which maintains the partnership. And right in the middle of the discussion, do the following. Show concern, as much concern for your partner as you do the issue. It's simple. You just say, honey, what is the most important thing to you here, so that you take that into account. And then after you create a process of making good decisions and create the process of reaching agreement, it is very important that you learn to express gratitude and to give compliments and to recognize one another for the effort both are making to reach, first of all, an agreement and then maintaining it. I repeat from the very beginning, marriage is different than any other relationship because the things that married couples do are the highest stake issues we found in life. Create good partnerships so that these issues become sources of enjoyment, satisfaction, and high reward.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by FirstAnswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit FirstAnswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.